My next guest helped organize today's sportsman's event at the Capitol. He is Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb. Leader Kolb, thanks very much for your time. It's good to see you.
Always good to see you, Liz.
So you started this event. It's the Sportsman and Outdoor Recreation Legislative Awareness Day. Why did you start it and feel the need that that was something necessary to do?
Well, I think mostly because I think it's an underappreciated industry in our state economically. If you look at hunting, fishing, ATVs, snowmobiling, trapping, these are industries that support New York State economically. And we felt, and also talking to different members of these industries, that it was a good idea to promote this as a positive economic development, positive impact on New York State. And one way to do that is to raise awareness, raise education, which is what the day's all about.
So, I mean, what you're talking about in part is that you had somebody, for example, a representative from Remington. These are industries that generate revenue, upstate particularly, where there isn't a whole heck of a lot of revenue to be generated in some areas.
Well, if you look at I shouldn't say no one, there's a lot of people that don't realize that Remington Arms exists in Ilion, New York, and they employ over 1,100 people. And these are people that pay taxes, that are employed. And also, so when they talk about doing things that affect the firearms industry, this could affect employment right here in New York State.
Okay, you were quoted in a report on this event as saying that it wasn't about guns, but you did bring in the NRA's top federal lobbyist to talk, Chuck Cunningham. He was pretty, I don't want to say extreme, but strong in his language. He talked about, I'm looking at a report that I actually did from a radio interview that he gave earlier today. He said that a bill, for example, that a Republican, Congressman Pete King from Long Island, proposed a 1,000-foot ban, if you will, making it a federal crime to use a gun within 1,000 feet of a federal elected official. He called that silly. He belittled Carolyn McCarthy for wanting to have a ban on high-capacity magazines of the type that were used in Arizona. I mean, do you espouse all of what he said?
Well, I think where I would differ is how to espouse the viewpoint.
Right.
I don't think we should demonize anybody on any side of an issue. We have sincere disagreements on this. On this proposal, I don't think it's a good idea either, but I think it's the way I would approach it differently in terms of pointing out the not so positive aspects of that legislation.
The King
Correct.
proposal. What about the high capacity magazine ban? I mean, her argument, the Congresswoman's argument, is obviously a particularly personal issue for her because her husband was killed in the Long Island Railroad shooting with a high capacity magazine. They were banned in the assault weapons ban, which then sunsetted in '04. Now they're illegal to buy. What does a sportsman like yourself, you're a gun owner, need with a high capacity magazine like that?
Well, I think it's because they're always trying to focus on the weapon rather than the criminal, and I think that's where there's a debate difference, is that no matter what sort of bans you put in, criminals are going to find guns and they're going to use them to the detriment of those that they victimize. And so then it becomes about the debate about having the freedom to buy whatever weapon you want. And I don't care if you ban them, if a criminal can get a hold of a weapon no matter whether they're banned or not. And that's why the legislation sometimes becomes silly, because you're putting a ban in that people can still access, shall we say, illegal weapons, which is happening all the time. And forget the magazine issue, just handguns, automatic weapons are available in the black market and throughout the entire globe. So that's where sometimes I think that people are protective of, okay, and this is the whole slippery slope argument. Well, then you start there, then you go there, then you go there. And I think really it's trying to say, if I have this ban on this weapon that will never ever be used in a crime, it's just not true.
But government does draw the line. I mean, this is a libertarian argument, in fact, almost, that you're making, which is to say, you have to draw the line somewhere. For example, alcohol is legal with certain restrictions, yet marijuana is not, for example. There are weapons that you can't buy. There are just things that are not legal to purchase, and yet magazines, high-capacity magazines, the argument is, for some reason, are on this side of that bright line, whereas, I don't know, nuclear weapons, which is ridiculous, but is on the other.
Well, I think fundamentally you're saying, if you put the law in place, now what happens? So someone says, I can't legally purchase the weapon, but that doesn't mean the weapon can't be purchased. And that's what always happens with I'll call attempts at gun control, is that you're putting in laws that law-abiding citizens follow, but the criminal still does not.
Well, would you then, to follow that argument to the logical conclusion, say that we should have no gun control at all?
No, I think you have a certain processes that we go through in terms of firearms. You know, the pistol permit process in New York State, I think, is a good one. In terms of having to provide an application, you have a background check from law enforcement, and the judge has to sign your application. Most people that are introducing gun laws in New York State have never, ever gone through that process and understand what a law-abiding gun owner does or doesn't do in terms of purchasing or possessing a firearm.
But you have, obviously.
And I have.
Okay.
And it's not easy. You can't, in New York State, and that's what I'm saying, in New York State versus other states, there's other states that have a lot looser gun laws, but some will point to different crime statistics that where you can easily more access a weapon, you have less crime in certain areas. So there's all sorts of arguments on all different sides that sometimes don't make sense to anyone on a particular day.
You have a permit to carry concealed, and you do, but not at the Capitol, you've told
Correct.
me. Have you thought about, when you're in the district, are you carrying?
Sometimes, not all the time.
Have you thought about carrying more frequently in the wake of what happened in Tucson? Because some elected officials have, in fact, said, members of Congress said, they are now going to be carrying a weapon. Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, I don't. The event in Tucson, which was a real tragedy, didn't trigger me to think about it more or less. I've always, whenever I've carried my weapon and concealed it, is out of personal safety and protection. Now, I don't care whether we had that event in Tucson or not. There's people, there's criminals out there that get very brazen, and more people are getting brazen, especially when you have a tough economy. And so it's just, you know, there's an old saying that I was told once: it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Well, but then the other argument is, if you have it, you're more likely to use it. I mean, there are statistics that say that if there's a gun in the house, you have a higher likelihood of having an accident with a gun.
Well, I don't know if, well, of course, versus not having a gun at all, of course you're going to have, if you have any guns, you're not going to have any accidents. Sure, it's like, well, I'm never going to have a car accident if I don't drive an automobile.
That's true.
So, but that's kind of a counter logic to rationalize almost that position. But, you know, I think ultimately, I think it's a right that we have as Americans. I think it's one of our freedoms and democracy and choices that we have in a free country versus an oppressed country. And I think people feel very strongly and emotionally about it.
Did you think at all about canceling this particular event because of the sensitivity surrounding the issue? And you knew that there was, I mean, you've gotten more press around this particular event now than you did the last time that I recall that you had. I mean, so of course it's only the second year that you've had it, but did you think at all about perhaps maybe putting it off?
Well, we didn't really discuss it at any great length because we felt that the whole aspect of today was not defending anything. It was about information and awareness, and why should we change that? It was an absolute tragedy. You had a criminal commit a crime. It was awful. It was terrible. People lost their lives. But the two are not connected in that way, other than when sportsmen and sportswomen use firearms to hunt. That's about the only connection that a firearm was used. And really, of course, everybody has sent condolences and prayers to all the families and the victims. And, of course, we're wishing Congresswoman a rapid recovery, Gabby, as they affectionately refer to her. But no, I didn't see the connection, which is why we didn't look at postponing it.
We're going to be having the budget. Just want to briefly talk to you about it. To switch gears for a second, Governor Cuomo, of course, is going to be putting out a budget on the 1st of February. Have you had any indication? I know you met with him. He had all the legislative leaders in and some members of the respective conferences into the mansion. Did you have any feeling about what was going to happen? Did he telegraph to you that there was going to be this massive state worker layoff?
No, he did not, and he did not get into any specific proposals he was going to be making with the budget. He didn't get detailed whatsoever. I think actually his administration's been fairly mum about that to everybody, as far as I know. But no, we didn't get any specific details.
It seemed to me, or there are reports that he actually telegraphed it to members of the Assembly Democratic Conference now, and maybe even perhaps on the Senate side. Do you think that because he's more in line with you from an ideological standpoint, that he didn't think he was going to get pushback from the Assembly Republicans, who of course are really interested in fiscal discipline, and the Senate Republicans, he needs their votes because there's an assumption that the Senate Democrats are going to be potentially difficult for him, maybe, when the budget votes come down?
Yeah, I would agree with that because, quite frankly, in the time that I've served in Albany, the Assembly Democrat Conference is always about tax and spend. And they have never been about fiscal austerity in terms of, you know, we always have to, we're going to spend money in state government for a lot of different things. But it's certainly when you start looking at taxing people, adding $10 billion in taxes and not reinventing government, redesigning it, shrinking the size and cost. You've got to make those efforts, and they've never been prone to want to do that. They want to say, just keep spending and spend more next year and spend more next year. We're going to spend money on state government and all sorts of departments and agencies and operations. So, but it's how you spend it and where you spend it, and some of their priorities we've not been aligned with.
So you are prepared as a conference to vote yes, even if those layoffs, are going to hurt people in your district inevitably?
Well, we'll be prepared to fairly evaluate the governor's budget. And the reason I'm not, and I've said about the layoffs, that I think it's not responsible to comment about layoffs until there is a plan in front of us,
right,
if there is one. Because there are people that are employed by the state, their families, friends, relatives. It's got to be nerve-wracking for someone to just be throwing numbers out there. And I just think, why are we creating that angst in people until we know for sure what the governor's proposal?
So you think it was irresponsible to leak it to begin with?
I agree, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Assembly Leader Brian Kolb, I want to thank you very much for coming in, and it's good to see you as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Liz.